Very good morning to all. My name is Architect Tushar Mandal, and I'm a teaching faculty at the Periyar School of Architecture, New Delhi. I welcome you all to webinar number 43 in the Every Friday webinar series, a platform for young minds to express their ideas. Today's webinar will be presented by Ms. Shviti Tagore, who will be discussing cities beyond architecture. To quickly introduce the speaker, Shviti Tagore is a sociologist who has completed her bachelor's in sociology honors from Delhi University and a master's in sociology from Jamia Millia Islamia. She is currently working as an independent researcher and is a teacher trainee. Her areas of research interest are sociology of gender and sexuality, urban sociology, and sociology of religion, and she has published on the same. Today, she will be presenting on the topic of cities beyond architecture through a social lens. So I request Shruti to now begin with her presentation.
Okay, so I'll start. So I am already working on a paper which heavily discusses about sociology and architecture and the connect between the two. So that's why I've always been very keen on attending these webinars. I've been attending them since the beginning, for the last 1 year. And while listening to other architects talking about their work and design and art, I thought that, talking about urban sociology with architect students would be very, very important because when you're starting this course, it's very important to remember that not just the technical aspect of the course of architecture, but also the social aspect is very important while you're designing a building. So this presentation is actually an introduction to all the students and people who are trying to learn something about design and this course. So I will be discussing in this format today. So today, first, we will be discussing about the historical emergence of cities. Then we'll discuss about the coming up of the cities, and then about urban sociology and the need and scope of it in the field of architecture. Starting with the historical emergence of settlements, it's very important to remember or just to know that, when we as human beings began in the early stages, we all can, go back to our history books in class 6th and 7th. We know that the early man or the Stone Age man was not somebody who was living in a house and was not somebody who was living in a city, but rather we were not people who had any concept of settlement at that time. We were moving around, and that's why we were also known as hunters and gatherers. So our idea of settlement was moving all the time, and we were taking shelter in temporary places like caves. So caves were the earliest places where the humans would take shelter for the night. So our life was very similar to that of animals. We were living from, day-to-day basis, surviving from one day to the other, because all the time, the only thing that humans could think about at that time was food and sleep. So you would hunt throughout the day for food, then rest for a while, and then do the same again. And just, during the night, they would take shelter in a cave. So as we were, smaller groups of people, because at that time population was not very large, so people used to move around in small groups, and maybe just it cannot be even described as a group, just 2-3 people together, and they were constantly moving from one place to the other. But with evolution and with the population increase, there were smaller colonies that got formed. So here we can see that, from a smaller population, people started moving in larger groups. But these groups are also not groups which are, very large. They're hardly 6 to 7 people together. And over here, what came up is the need for rearing the young ones. So this was not something which was there at the earliest stage. Now we started coming up with new trends. For example, people would stay at one place, and then after moving around the whole day, or maybe 2 or 3 days, they would come back to that same place. So such trends were also found in other species like birds and fish. So like a bird would, come back to the same nest season after season. So the concept of getting attached to a place or a group of people that came up, and human beings started becoming very territorial in nature. So this gave rise to temporary settlements. Why these are called temporary settlements? Because this was not a very well established place. And over here, for the first time, we can find remains of people coordinating with each other. So because in the earlier times people were only moving around from one place to the other, there was no mental space for any sort of human emotion to take place. So they did not have the time or the leisure to bond with each other, or to develop any form of attachment with the humans around them. But now, because they were coming together, to live together, and from my need and my food and my satisfaction, my gratification, the idea changed to our needs. There were loose associations which were formed. So from just one family, your association now was with two or three more families. So like small hamlets were formed with just two three families living together. So here the concept of division of labor can be seen. As the picture also depicts, like one person is maybe hunting, one person is preparing the weapons, one person is collecting the wood. So the work got divided between people, and they started coexisting together. Earlier they were living just alone, like two three people, only focused on their own selves. But now they started living together, and they started caring for each other also. So all of these emotions of care, support, discipline, these started coming up over here. With people living together, there started to be a need for the rise of cemeteries and shrines. So over here in the first picture, I'm sure, as I'll just give an analogy also. If we remember, in Egypt, the pyramids and the tombs and whatever is left of their history, earlier history, is in the form of these pyramids and these tombs and temples. So I'm sure these structures were not the very first thing that came up. It developed into a pyramid today, but 2 3 10,000 years ago, maybe even more number of years ago, it did not began as a full structured pyramid. They started burying their dead into like maybe a smaller place. Over the years, it got modified, the shape, the size got modified, and today we see it as a remain of a pyramid. But it did not start like that from the beginning. So why cemeteries and shrines are an important point over here? It is because these areas became an important area of shared vision. So humans who were living at temporary settlements, they would come together at this point to bury the dead and pay their respect. So in the earlier times, there was a lot of respect that was given to the dead people. It was a whole ceremonious concern for them, that their next life, their next journey should be very smooth, very nice. So various artifacts or jewelry or other things were buried with them. Similarly, for shrines, even in the National Museum, we can see that there are certain artifacts from the earlier times that are there, which are very creative and very artistic in nature. That as a part of your course, also, I'm sure you visit a lot of temples and older uh, structures where the sculptures that are drawn are very, very artistic in nature. So they did not develop, suddenly, that people became creative at one age. From the very beginning, shrines were a place that held a very aesthetically enchanting experience for them. So both of these areas, the cemeteries and the shrines, they all depicted that people were very hopeful for the future. And these were the places that they came together as a community, and then again dispersed back into their temporary settlements. Now, again, keep in mind that evolution is a constant process, and people are constantly trying to live better quality of lives. So there emerged the importance of two things. So for a better quality of life, humans required better nourishment and domestication of animals. So domestication of animals, as also seen in this picture, that they started using fox, dogs, ducks, cows, horses, goats for various needs that they had at that time. So, for example, animals like cows and goats could have been used for dietary purposes. Animals like fox and dogs were used for security purposes, and horses were used for travel purposes. Similarly, they also required better nourishment, so they started producing their own food. So in this picture also, if you can see that the settlement is here, but right outside their houses and the place that they would reside, they would start farming, and they would start growing certain kinds of plants and grass, beans, which they required for a better diet. At this time, it is also important to note that they were not always hunting. So the time that they had off hunting, they used that for socialization. They used that time for leisure purposes. For example, they started forming groups amongst each other that would maybe play or take care of other young ones in the group. So over here, another process that started was domestication of women and the need to protect them. So why this term is being used over here is because along with division of labor, sexual division of labor also took place. So women were assigned a certain kind of job and men took up a certain kind of job in their society. So to go into a little bit of detail over here, the jobs, tasks that women did were, like harvesting and taking care of the field, the agricultural work, taking care of the nourishment of the men. And because man did not have to, go for hunting all the time, now their role changed from hunter to a protector. So these settlements, people could get attacked by maybe animals, could get attacked by other temporary people, groups of people. So the role of men changed from just being a full-time hunter to being a part-time hunter, but also a part-time protector. Now these all aspects, you know, um, contributed to permanent settlements coming into being. So why permanent settlements? Because you can't find such land with which is very fertile for a particular crop or a particular agricultural produce everywhere. So the humans realize that we can't leave this place and move again to some other place next year. We need this crop for our nourishment. We need this environment for our better life. So permanent settlements started coming, and with this permanent settlements, small villages and hamlets came up with 10, from 2 3 families living together. 8 to 10 families started living together. And with this, various other concepts also came up where human relations were given a lot of, they encountered certain human relations and social relations which were not there earlier. For example, discipline. When you're living in a community, there is a certain kind of discipline that everybody has to maintain. Social norms came up, social cooperation came up. You're not always fighting, you're not surviving from one day to the other. There is some form of relaxation in your life. So these all communal setups that were happening gradually over a period of time, they became very very important elements, or I can say the foundation for cities. Because for people to come up, for the cities to come up, these aspects were very important, like social cooperation, discipline, labor, division of labor, um, not always fighting, peace. And a very, very important aspect here is the aspect of neighbors. In a village, of course, this is not, we are not talking about today. This is like, many, many years ago. The role of a neighbor was very important. It is your neighbor is a person who is always, there at every occasion, at every let's say important thing that is happening in the village. You're celebrating together, you're mourning together. So the idea of a neighbor became very important. So this is how, from being just moving as hunters and gatherers, we came up to some form of settlement over the years. Now moving ahead to the next topic, which is coming up of cities, which is the actual basis for the last topic, urban sociology. Cities, the term city in English was actually derived from two Latin terms, which is actually a set of two words that mean nothing related to nothing exactly as city, but related to the setup of the city at that time. So the first term is civitas, which means membership of a citizenry. So, when the concept of cities came up, city was not a place where, everybody had equal rights, like, the rights that we enjoy, or the freedom that we enjoy today. It was not something that came in very easily in the earlier times. So only a special group of people had access or membership to the citizenry. So civitas means that, and civis means citizen. So these two terms together gave, the term city was derived from these two words. The earliest records that we can find of city, or the term being used in any context, human context, comes in from the Greek philosophy or and the Roman world. So in the Greek philosophy, there was a concept of polity, and in their language they call it polis, which means that polis was actually a group of people. Like I mentioned before, this it was a very special group of people who made all the political and administrative decisions in the area. They were the decision makers, and there were certain criteria that people had to fulfill in order to become a participant of this polis. The criteria were: first, you had to be free, because at that time human slavery was being practiced. Second, you had to be a male person. Females were not allowed to be a part of the administration, the government. And the third criteria was you had to own a certain piece of land. So you had to be a landowner. If you can fulfill all these three criteria, only then you can become a part of the polis. And becoming a part of this special group actually meant that you not only enjoyed some sort of control over the government or the administrative things, but you also held immense amount of power in your household. Now, polis did not just cover the city area, but it also covered the nearby villages. In the Roman world, in the Rome, a similar setup, a similar arrangement was found, just that they did not call it as polis, they called it as civitas. The name changed, but the arrangement was absolutely similar. Another country where we find, early records of city and the mention of it is Germany. But the Germans rejected both the ideas of civitas and polis. They came up with their own concept of a burg. So a burg is a fortified state. It refers just to the physical space, not the people. People living in the burg were known as the burgerias. So it somewhat looked like what is depicted here in the picture. This area was the city for them. Like, this fortified state was the city. And according to them, city was not a neutral place. It was not a place where everybody was, just focusing on the economic and political life. It was a place which was very, very sacred. And all the decisions, all the policies that were coming, that, they made, they had a foundation in religion, and something which was very godly in nature. So in the earlier times, there was a very distinguished, difference between village and a city, where the village had a very simple life. People were very, very peacefully coexisting with each other, with just 8 to 10 to maybe maximum 12, 15 families living together. But city was the place which was geographically, it had a huge boundary, and it was very politically and economically strong. It provided opportunities to people for economic growth, um, where they can financially become better. So here the concepts of markets and trade and shops and all of these things came up, making the city a very, very attractive place. So, migration and the process of people moving here, from village to the city areas, all of these processes started taking place. Now, coming to the last point of the presentation, which is urban sociology. which is actually, we will be covering why urban sociology came up as a subject, and why do you as architecture students need to study this. Urban sociology came up actually in America in the early 20th century. So what happened was, in the later half of the 19th century, around 1858 60, there were many new things that were coming up in the American continent, subcontinent. So what was happening was that new buildings were coming up, marches were taking place, revolts were taking place, and this got the attention of the professors in the Chicago School of Sociology, under the Chicago University. So William Isaac Thomas, who was an anthropologist and a sociologist, he used the survey method, which was a very popular method at that time, to understand what is happening in the city. So he was wondering that, new buildings are coming up, people are growing economically, financially, everything is becoming better, the country is growing. Then why is there so much disturbance and so much, disharmony in the society? Why is there no peace? So he wanted to test this hypothesis, and he came up with the concept of social disorganization in the cities. He appointed Robert Ezra Park, who was a journalist. He joined Mr. Thomas, and both of them started investigating that what is happening in the city. So Robert Ezra Park was actually an investigating reporter, and he came up with the proof that yes, social disorganization exists in this society, in this city of Chicago. So what proof did he got? He said that, there is alcoholism that's happening. This started as a leisure activity, but has now become a very big social problem, where criminals are coming up, where people are conducting crimes under the influence of alcohol. Uh, Another aspect contributing to social disorganization was prostitution, which began as a profession due to the loneliness of migrant workers and laborers, but it again led to social disorder and disharmony in families. Moral disorder was happening, harassment, antisocial behavior, animal abuse was taking place. Then a case study was also done by Paul G. Cisse in 1932 on a taxi dance hall, where he reported that the women who were performing in these bars, there was a taxi dance hall was actually a bar, were living two lives. They were living a dual life. One where they're performing, but when they move out in the city, when they move out of that area, they don't want to let anybody know what they do as a for professional life. So these were women who were coming from the areas of slum, the areas of ghettos. They were people, women who were coming from from economically backward area. But the men who were coming to these bars were belonging to all communities. So these problems, or these areas that they had recognized as the areas of social disorganization, made them believe that yes, we need a subject, we need a proper research to be done in this area. And thus, Chicago School plays a very important role in the emergence of urban sociology as a full-fledged subject. Now, under this whole project, Ernest Burgess was a person who drew the map of the city of Chicago. So here I would like to just quickly discuss and this map in a little bit of detail, because I'm sure as architects you also map cities and areas, but your mapping is very technical in nature. How the roads should be, what the dimensions should be, what the spacing should be, how much space can a house take. But when a sociologist maps a city, it is very different. So here, if we can see in the innermost circle, so this was the map of the Chicago city at that time, which Burgess came up with. And this is a very, very popular study, which is even, heavily studied by sociologists today. The innermost circle over here is the loop one. This is where the most influential people of the country lived. The most, people who are very, very rich, people who are very, very, you know, uh, had a lot of privileges in their life. They lived in this, for this innermost loop. Right next to them initially lived people who were, belonging to the middle class, but because these people required laborers and, people who would serve them, their workers, their drivers, their helpers, they started living nearby this area. And that is why eventually this area got converted into a slum area, and the middle class people shifted right to the end, zone 4. Eventually what happened was, because the rich were very influential, they started pushing their boundaries, and this area of the slum got, or the ghetto area, became very, very small. So the middle class didn't want to be, associated with either the rich people or the poor people, and they did not feel belong. So they decided, okay, we'll just go to the periphery of this city. We'll just go, very away from these two classes. So this is how, the mapping of the city, or the way people were living, the way they were building their houses, had a very, very social reason behind it. Now coming to the scope and need of urban sociology. So urban sociology mainly studies about cities. Everything related to the city is discussed in this subject. So, the problems associated with it, for example, the planning, the development, traffic regulations, um, how markets are working, how residential areas are supposed to be built, how hospitals are to be built, how schools are to be built, public hygiene, social hygiene, everything. To give an example of how a space which is designed by an architect can be looked from a very social lens. For example, when you're building public spaces like a park, for example, you've been given a project to design a park. So using your social lens, you can decide that, okay, maybe, is this park going to be a dog friendly park? Is this park going to be a park which is very well equipped for children? Is it going to be a space which is only for playing, or do we set up a garden also over here? Can we build an area in the park where the old people can sit, because they can't, move around too much? Another example can be, if you are hired by a big company to build or create a restaurant. So again, when you're building a restaurant, it's not just using your technical skills where, you can decide that, okay, a location has been given, a space has been given, and you just have to draw the dimensions of it. What your social skills can contribute, or what urban sociology can contribute over here, would be that, when you are building, when you're designing the seating area in that restaurant, what you will be thinking is that, what should be the distance between the two tables? It should be, the arms of the two customers should not touch. There should be enough space for the waiter to move around. But when you're sitting in a restaurant, you also want to provide privacy to your customers, so that they can talk freely, they can enjoy that leisure time with their family. So that space need not just be a one arm distance, but it has to be a little more. You need to think whether this space, whether this restaurant will have a special provision for kids, for people who have small children, or will have a special provision for the people who are disabled. If there is obviously the restaurant will also have washrooms. So you will be, studying as a part of your color theory, that washrooms are not to be, made of very dark colors. It will scare away the children. Secondly, if the washroom is too dark in color, it will make you feel very suffocated and claustrophobic. But if the same space is maybe a little lighter in shade, white in shade, it will make you feel nice, and, it will give a very soothing effect. So all of these aspects of planning, of designing, will require a very sociological lens. So I'll just, conclude my presentation by suggesting that, by just highlighting that how the projects that an architect gets are very heavily, influenced by sociology, and how you can use your social lens in these projects. For example, if you're getting a community project to build residential area, or RWA offices, community centers. Over here also, you have to first, understand who are the people who are living in that area. What is their community? What is their culture? Uh, how do I build a space which does not make them feel isolated? which makes them feel very homely. If you're getting a big social project like building an NGO, building a school, a college, a university, over here also you have to understand where is this university, coming up, which state it is coming up in, what is the subject, what does the university stand for, what is the main principle. In schools, is it a convent school, is it a school which is public or primary, is it a government school? So for all of these things, not just technical knowledge but a little bit of subjective and sociological knowledge is also important. For example, again, if you're getting ecological projects like building a park, national park, zoo, aquarium, reconstruction projects of entirely planning a city. For example, Chandigarh today is a very, very well planned city, but it was not like that many years ago. So to do that kind of a thing, the government always appoints a sociologist to be on that core team. It is not just about planning and designing the technical aspects. Again, if you're planning a commercial project like airports, metro, industry, factories, these industries and factories are not coming up in the middle of the city. They're always, at the periphery, maybe near an area which is, where smaller villages, smaller settlements are residing. So you don't want to build an industry or a factory which sort of, ends up uh, making people feel very sad, and they start revolting against it. There are protests, and ultimately your project gets on hold. It doesn't get completed only. So you have to understand what is this area where the industry is coming up. How do I make people believe, or how do I connect with the people that this will not harm their livelihood? So all of these aspects are something that you need to keep in mind while you're designing a space. So with this, I will end my presentation today. And I hope that I've been able to at least introduce urban sociology as a very, very important aspect of planning and designing. Thank you so much.